Hello, today we are going to create a push block puzzle. So one thing we'll learn in here is we'll go over quickly how to create a static mesh again. We're using brushes, make a quick material, something super simple. How to string together a series of push blocks into a trigger that the trigger will only detect the push block. And once you put all three of the push blocks in place, you can put the fourth one in its final resting place, which will trigger the end of the puzzle. So let's get started. So what we're going to need is basically for you, let's delete this, to create, let's delete this, for you to create a static mesh using brushes. So let me go over that again. I've done that in other videos, but make it really quick. Go to your brushes, select a material. We don't want checkerboards. I'm going to go with basic brown. Put a box down. Going to scale it. And I'm going to give it a little more of an interesting shape by scaling the top face. There we go. Now I'm going to copy and paste it. Pull this up. And I'll scale this as well. Alright, so that's my two brushes that are going to make my push block. So if I select both of them, and then I go to the details and make sure this little triangle is pushed so it unrolls and shows you create static mesh. So I create static mesh. I go to my appropriate folder and I name it appropriately. I keep all my static mesh called SM underscore. And I already created this, so I'm going to just leave it as is. Hit cancel. So I create it in that folder, and I go to that folder in the contents, and I see here SM push block. Double click on that, and here we have our static mesh. So using brushes to create static mesh is great block out material. It's quick. It has its flaws for sure. You'll have to play with it and do some tricks to get your pivot point to work properly. Otherwise, you really have to go into Maya and clean them up. You can create them here and then go into Maya and clean it up. It actually works pretty well. It's not finished, polished art, but if you're keeping things low poly, it works really well. So the one thing we got to do is the UVs for the lighting are going to be messed up on this. So if I go to my UVs and toggle the display, you're going to see that these do not look like, my UVs are up here, this red mess, and that's because it's on UV channel number 0. If we hit UV channel number 1, that looks like a more appropriate UVs for an object. So we want to make sure that light map coordinate index is set to 1. If it's set to 0, you're going to see this, and so the lighting in the level is going to make it look really strange. So we make sure this is set to 1, because by default it's 0, and then the lighting will be okay. And the other thing you got to do is make sure you have collision. Right now you see the blue box, that's my collision, but by default it'll have none. So go over here to collision and say add box simplified collision, and when you click that, you'll get that blue box. Hit save, close our static mesh. Now we need to create the push block. We've created the static mesh for the push block. Now we actually want to create the blueprint for the push block. So I go to my, I create a blueprint folder here. And as you notice, since this is a top-down level, I've called it Diablo. Go into actors, right-click, blueprint. I need to create an actor. Create an actor, blueprint, test 2. I double click on it. So what we see in here is an event graph, which we can add events like, event actor overlap. If something touches it, something happens, that type of thing. In the viewport, this is where I can add lights, static mesh, etc. So what I want to do is, in the viewport, I want to go to components, add a component, and I want to just add a static mesh. And by default, it just brings in nothing. So what I need to do is bring in that test block. So I go to my content folder. Actually, you don't need to go to your content folder. If you do the drop down menu, it's going to find all the static mesh in your project, which there's a lot of. So because I have all kinds of content from Infinity Blade and everything in here, SM test, and it's going to, oh, it doesn't find it. How strange. What is it called? Oh, SM puzzle block. I call my blueprint test. Duh, 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 duh. Done. So search SM puzzle. Ta-da! It finds it. Click on that. There it is. Our static mesh is in here. We know we have it has collision because we set it up with the static mesh. Alright, so we need a material on this. So simple enough, I'm going to go to the material slot, do the same thing. I'm going to go, did I name all my materials M? I believe I do. I don't want to search for, let's see if it just finds brown. Brown. It does, M brown. That's the one I want. Nice brown all over it. Very lovely. Alright, so now that we got the look we want, now we want to move it around the level. So right now if I drag and drop this in, it's not going to do anything, it's just going to sit there. So what I needed to do is check simulate physics, and I need to go to the mass in kilograms, and I need to make this lighter. Right now it's 1215 kilograms, it's going to weigh a ton. Your player won't be able to push it. So I believe I knocked it down to 250 and it behaves pretty well. So 250 kilograms. And I changed this linear dampening to 1. This, you can play with these numbers a lot. Right now I played with 1 and it worked alright. It keeps it from the player running into it and it moving really quickly based on your player's momentum or inertia. It just, keeps it consistent that if I run up to it and push it, it pushes the same speed as if I walk up and push it. Or at least it gets it closer. It's not perfect. I could look into making that perfect, but not now. And the other things you got to do is lock the rotation. So that way it just moves in our, it doesn't rotate and get all weird and squirrely. It stays on the ground and just pushes around. So that's all you need to do. If you hit compile, and if I drag it into my level, and I make sure it's on the floor, I hit play, and oops, I'm all the way up here, big brown block, and I can push it. Seems to behave pretty well. And let's push it off. Alright, so I'm going to delete this one so I don't have all these crazy, and go back to my first test one. It's the exact same thing. So delete, delete, so I don't have 99 tests in my level. Put him up here, or her. It's the exact same thing. Alright, we've got a push block that works. Obviously, if I run around here, these are other push blocks with just badly UV textures on them. They all are exactly the same except they have a different texture. Alright, so I made these little plates here to just see where I want to push the block, so I have a visual representation. One of the keys to developing your mission, not only for the player but for you, is keep the visual cues, keep the visuals in your level, so as you're developing it, you're not wondering, oh, where is my trigger again? You know, put a visual representation of where the trigger is. You're not wasting time running around wondering if you've hit the trigger or not. So all I did the exact same thing as I just created some brushes here as a guide, so when my block goes in, it stays in that spot. It's cleaner. Eventually I could have an animation of a block come up and lock it in place so the player can't push it out, but that's unnecessary for now. So just create some visual representation of where to push your block, and you want to make sure this is flat with the ground so you can push over, it doesn't get stuck. And if it does get stuck, just use a static mesh with no collision or something and still have a texture on it so you can see it. Very simple. Alright, so what we got to do now is make it that when I push this into a trigger, it recognizes it and will set a variable. So I need a trigger volume, make it an appropriate size. It's over my brown spot, so I'm not going to miss it. Go to my level blueprint. Let's delete this. So I need to remember context sensitive, on and off. It's your best friend, it's your worst enemy. It works very well with finding certain events, and it can hide certain events. So you better check it both on and off if you can't find something. Add event to trigger. Add on actor begin overlap. So when I touch my trigger, something's going to happen. So let's make sure the name's correct. It says trigger volume. That's a very generic name. Let's rename that. That's a bad. I keep all my triggers named trigger, and I'm going to call it puzzle test. So it's the trigger associated with my test block. Keep everything unified, names similar. So next thing we want to do is, let's be smart here and let's make sure it actually fires off. Print string test block success. Play. So we're going to notice one thing here. Oops, it gets stuck for one thing. Test block success. Okay. So I can push it over and it detects it, but also notice the fact that I run through it and it'll print the string. So right now what it's doing is any actor that touches this, it will go forward and do the next event function, whatever you put here. So any actor that goes through here. If I had an enemy running around, it would also activate this print string. So what we want to do is make sure that only our test block touches this trigger and then something happens. So, oh, this trigger didn't change its name. Interesting. Still says trigger volume on it. I'm going to change that just to make sure. Go back to my add event on collision. There we go. Surprised it didn't change that. Going to keep my print string for debugging purposes. So what I need here is a get class, and then that class needs to cast to our particular push block. So if I drag off from here and I type get class, I should find it. Get class. Now it needs to know what class you're looking for. So because our push block is a blueprint, it can find this class. If it's just a static mesh, it's not going to find your static mesh. That is not a class. So remember that. If you need it to be unique, there's tagging in things to work your way around some of these things. I'm not sure if it'll work in this situation, but you want to create a blueprint for this. And you do a lot of that in Unreal, creating blueprint classes. So if I go back here and drag this off, it's looking for a certain class. And name of my push block is test, so let's just put, it's not puzzle, test. Let's see if it finds it. Cast to class test. Did I find it? There we go. Cast to blueprint puzzle test class. So it will find it, but it can be a little bit difficult. You saw that list come up. There's a lot. So this step is crucial, being able to find this. As long as it's a blueprint, you'll be able to find it. Alright, so now let's test that only the push block reacts to this. Compile, play. No print string is appearing. Getting stuck. That should really be a... Oh. Oh, better connect these two. Stop. Connect. While I make these videos, you can see all my mistakes. And you can watch me fix them just like you'll make the same mistakes. There we go. Test block success. Okay. That is a success. Next step. Let us get it to set a variable. So we've got the print string. It would be good to have a play sound and even be more obvious. What if you turn your head away and you didn't catch the print string? Good to hear. I have a sound cue off on that. So for this one, I'll do play sound at location. That location is going to be my actor, so I get actor location. Get actor location. That actor is my push block. I'll have the sound play off my push block. So if I click on it, go back here and click context sensitive, create a reference. So now my sound will play where that push block is. And the next thing I need to do is create a variable, so then when I push the block into this, or I push the block into this, it's going to set a boolean. So over here I have a whole bunch of booleans set up for other puzzles I've set up. So what I need this one to be called is puzzle test. So add a variable, and by default it just says new variable, so let's name it puzz test. And if we look over here, this is a boolean variable. You can set it to be an integer, float, name, string, etc. Keep it as a boolean. So after this happens, I want to set my boolean to true. So set, and by default your boolean is false. Connect that and check this box. So now we know that this block has been pushed into this, and this is true. So I need a sound. Audio. Magic shield. That sounds good. Let's test this. And notice I'm being, I test everything. Do not build 13 things and then test it and try to figure out. Alright, my magic shield sound went off. Good deal. That should be setting my variable. I don't see why it would not. Alright, so what I've done here in my level, you can see, is I've repeated this with multiple puzzle blocks which are duplicated. All you do is go in here. I created one I liked that pushed on the floor and worked well. I created this first setup, and then I went in and duplicated 4 more, so a total of 5. And I just changed the textures on them inside of the blueprint. And the viewport, I clicked on the static mesh and I just changed the material. So they're the exact same static mesh. They have the exact same settings because I just duplicated the first one I liked. So now I have 5 different push blocks. So because I have 5 different push blocks, I'm going to need 4 or 5 variables. So this is what I've done in here. So you look through here, I have a block that's called Eagle, and obviously the triggers is called Puzzle Eagle. I have a block called Fish. I have a trigger that's the fish. I have a turtle block, which obviously the trigger's called Turtle. And then I have a dragon block, which is supposed to be your last and final piece. But you cannot, this is the last one. So this one will do nothing unless all 3, actually I only have 3, I didn't set up 4, I'm not sure why. Just 3. Actually I guess puzzle test will be my 4th. All 4 of these have to be in place before the dragon block will react. So what I did is, as you can see, just like with the puzzle test, I created fish in place, turtle in place, eagle in place, wolf in place. I'm only going to use 3. I'm going to use the fish, the turtle, and the eagle, and then we're going to use the test. So we're going to use these 4. I'm going to put a comment. So it's easy for me to read my blueprint. So after I push all 4 of these into their spots, then I can go to the dragon block and push it into its spot, and we'll hear the dragon roar. So let's test it out, and I'll show you how I set that up. So actually right now it's set up for 3. So if I push this one, we hear the turtle. Hear the eagle. Hear the fish. And now the dragon. Oh, come on, dragon. No! Why does dragon suddenly not want to push? Aha! Perfect example of making games. Things don't work. Oh, jeez. Just make that go away for now. Retest. So right now I don't have to push them all the way in before it activates. If you're going to make a finished game, you're going to want to get the player to get it all the way in there and probably lock it in place, which is another lesson. Alright, so let's just prove that that doesn't work without all 3 in place. Nothing happens. And check out my print string up here. My print string says, the animals are not aligned. So I give the player a clue, or at least me a clue. My string should be really like a print HUD, something more in place. If I push it in place without the other 3, it says the animals of the universe are not aligned. So what we basically did is exactly what we did here for the puzzle test, but we just repeated it for the eagle block, etc. So now let's add the puzzle test to be part of this puzzle. So what I've got here is each one of them setting their Boolean variable to true, eagle in place, fish in place, turtle in place, and now puzzle test in place. So what I need to happen here is the puzzle test, we don't set it, we need to get it. And I'm going to delete this real quick. So this is set up exactly the same as the others. The only difference, so we set it up exactly like this, same exact thing. But this is obviously cast to the Puzzle Dragon class. So what needs to happen after it knows the Puzzle Dragon is inside the trigger is it needs to go to a branch. And that branch has a true output, which we say dragon in place, and we play the roar. This is not necessary unless you want to have something happen after it. So we know in the level that the player has done this puzzle. So I have it set up for now, but nothing's happening after it. And when it's false, you don't have our condition, which is going to be these three are set to true, or four now. These four are set to true. If that's not happening, we tell the player, go get the animals of the universe and align them in their puzzles. So this right here is, usually you see a branch and it just has a single condition. If you want to add multiple conditions, which are our booleans here, what you need to do is, to break that, is create a node that's called an AND. So if you search, and I'm going to get rid of context sensitive, and then there it is, Boolean. There you go. So this lets us put in multiple Booleans must be true for this condition to work. So I add a pin because I have 4. So I already have this one set up. There's 4. Connect this. Connect my condition. Compile. Play. These are some of the worst materials ever. These materials look terrible. Please don't have your materials look like this. I'm strictly showing functionality. And for the finale, dun dun dun. Whoops. Feels so good. Feels so good. Alright. So remember, one thing to remember is on this branch, make sure you give us a false. This should probably have an audio too. Instead of just this tiny print string, I should obviously have a HUD display pop up and say something better than that tiny string come up. This is just for us developing. In the final game, you're going to want to have much bigger text. And I probably want to have an audio that's like something cueing the player like door locked, bad, figure out, make better. Alright, I hope that's clear. And I will talk to you later. And I think maybe I'll develop this to have more to do with the dragon. Maybe after the dragon is set, we have something even more interesting happen to the level. That's next time. Alright, bye-bye.